At the end of this session, you should be able to define fundamental terms, understand some basic assumptions, understand transference and countertransference. You will be able to demonstrate the correlation between the basic principles, identify key contributions, note the difference between modalities, as well as identify trends. In this session, we will explore background-focused therapies, some of their basic assumptions. We'll examine transference and countertransference in therapy and psychodynamic modalities. Psychodynamic theorists believe that the roots of current problems lie in the past, and thus exploring and interpreting past experiences are critical to alleviating current concerns or problems. In this, psychodynamic theorists believe that a focus on unresolved problems from a client's past that is impacting the present, identifying and understanding that past is crucial to healing in the present as well. And although as counseling therapists we do not diagnose clients, history and duration of symptoms is essential for other health professionals to make an accurate diagnosis. In our postmodern era of counseling and psychotherapy, most clinicians recognize the importance of taking a holistic approach to understanding their clients. Before examining the evolution of psychodynamic therapy and its beginnings in Freud's psychoanalysis, it's important to keep in mind that all of the psychodynamic modalities share the same basic assumptions, namely psychology, as in our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, and these lie at the root of psychological problems and disorders. These modalities assume that the unconscious experiences we have, our thoughts, our feelings, and actions influence us. Interpersonal relationships are internalized, and in particular, early attachment experiences that shape views of self and relationships. It is thought that they also shape personality. Psychological conflict is unavoidable and therefore can have the potential to undermine healthy development. And then we have defense mechanisms. We all have them. They exist to protect the ego and to reduce anxiety. Underlying behavior are complex meanings that are at the root of symptomatic behaviors, feelings that may be operating at a subconscious level. The therapeutic relationship is also powerful. Psychodynamic perspectives also consider the background or developmental history to be very important in understanding how and why problems have developed. Transference and countertransference. What is the role of transference and countertransference in therapy? Most post-Freudian therapists make use of their countertransference feelings, so it's important to remember that during the era of Freud, a therapist's reactions to the client were viewed as something to be completely avoided. Today, it can be considered to be more of a tool in therapy, providing, of course, any disclosure or sharing on the part of the therapist are appropriate and always with the best interest of the client in mind. Well, basically, transference is the client transferring feelings from their past to the therapist, and countertransference is the therapist transferring feelings from their past to the client. We will explore this a lot more as we go through the course. A little more on this idea of countertransference. So in Freud's time, countertransference was to be avoided. Current perspectives have shifted to view this as a natural consequence of human interaction and potentially as a vehicle for deepening the therapeutic alliance. So disclosure by a therapist who is aware and in tune with his or her countertransference feelings has the potential to utilize those feelings in the service of the therapeutic process. Doing so, however, must be related to the session, an immediate emotional reaction to the client, and of course coming from an ethical place and done with the best interest of the client in mind. And we'll be exploring again this transference and countertransference more as we go along in the course. What are some of the psychodynamic modalities? We have classic psychoanalysis, individual psychology, analytic psychology, ego psychology, object relations, self-psychology, and brief psychodynamic therapies. All of the modalities have evolved over time, and especially since Sigmund Freud laid the foundations with classic psychoanalysis. We'll be providing a brief overview of these in this course. Of course, we begin with classic psychoanalysis, which was developed by Sigmund Freud more than a century ago. It's a term that's used to describe traditional psychotherapy. Although many theories of human development and psychotherapy have evolved since Freud's time, he remains regarded as the father of psychotherapy through the use of what is called free association and basically recalling whatever comes to mind. The work of psychoanalysis, according to Freud, is to, quote him, make the unconscious conscious, unquote. According to Freud, the personality is comprised of three systems. We have the id, the superego, and the ego. Freud viewed these systems as overlapping, so not discrete. The id is the first system of personality that is present at birth, including all of the inherited systems, so instincts, and it is largely unconscious with two important strategies for obtaining pleasure: reflex actions and primary process. The superego can be thought of as the exact opposite of the id. The superego is a sort of rigid conscience that internalizes the rules and regulations or the right and wrong of a person's world. Now, the ego, like the superego, becomes differentiated from the id as a child develops. And energy from the id is what fuels power for both the ego and the superego. The ego is considered to not be present at birth, but it evolves as the infant realizes its separateness from the mother. Freud's theory is based on instincts. So all his instincts are either have life or death drives. So although some clinicians still practice classic psychoanalysis, most have gravitated toward different models wherein the difference between the approach lies in the clinician's choice of which aspect of childhood development to emphasize. Individual psychology was founded by Alfred Adler, and his view was less deterministic than Freud's, and he believed that all behavior is goal-oriented and that the general purpose of therapy is to help people feel empowered and self-actualized and build rewarding social involvement and relationships. The emphasis is on encouragement and logic rather than pathology. Adler's therapeutic approach discusses early childhood, birth order, and lifestyle assessment. We will look at Adler's approach in more detail in future sessions. Carl Jung worked with Freud for a few years before he branched off to develop his own theory of analytical psychology. He believed the unconscious mind was divided into two parts: the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. The personal unconscious holds repressed memories, archetypes, and it is where the shadow self are stored. The collective unconscious is where archetypes, myths, and symbols from our evolutionary past reside. Erik Erikson and Karen Horney built on Freud's foundation of the id, superego, and ego, and focused in faulty ego development rather than libido or sexual drives as a cause of pathology. They were referred to as ego psychologists. Erikson, in particular, was interested in the relationship between the superego, or societal norms, and biological drives in the development of identity across the lifespan. Horney emphasized the role of culture and environment in lifespan development. The next psychodynamic modality is object relations. Object relations moved away from this instinctual drive theory to a more developmental, relationship-centered perspective. Both Bowlby and Ainsworth focused on the attachment between the early objects, or caregivers, and the young child. Relational theorists Stack Sullivan and Mitchell focused more specifically on not only the relationship between the client and others, but the client and clinician. Next we have self-psychology. Self-psychology was created by Heinz Kohut. He kind of rejected Freud's drive theory and replaced it instead with an emphasis on the subjective experiences of the individual. So it is developmental, beginning with the infant's first needs, and relational, recognizing the importance of social interactions, or what Kohut referred to as self-object experiences. Brief psychodynamic psychotherapy offers a brief or time-limited focused approach that respects the psychodynamic frame, but it may incorporate other cognitive, experiential, and behavioral interventions. So classic psychoanalysis was conceptualized over a century ago by Sigmund Freud. So what are some current trends in psychodynamic therapies? The trends in psychodynamic therapies have moved toward brief solution-focused therapy and kind of evolved over in time to include mentalization, dialectic, schema theories, mindfulness, and therapies that emphasize a client's strength and resilience rather than devolving into past experiences or unconscious instinctual drives. We'll go into more looking at the integration of psychological theories into the development of new treatment modalities in future sessions. Let's summarize. This session we have focused on the importance of background in understanding people and offered us an introduction into a sampling of approaches and theorists that we might call reside under the psychodynamic umbrella. So including classic psychoanalysis, individual psychology, analytic psychology, and post-Freudian theories such as ego psychology, object relation psychology, and self-psychology.